Hi, everybody, and welcome to NASCAD Artwork Alumni Talks. Each month, I have the privilege and honor to chat with some of our alumni. Um, and this month, I'm joined by Amelia Robinson and hopefully Charmaine Wheatley. Amelia and I are gonna start off. So this week, we're talking about art and healing. So, Amelia, I was wondering if you could get us started off with showing some of your work. I know you brought a little presentation. Maybe that would be a good way for us to get introduced. Is that
I
cool?
can. Hello,
Yeah.
everyone. And I think I see who might be our co-presenter, so that's great.
Oh,
Yeah, I
great.
have a little
Charmaine, there you are.
presentation, which I will try to share. Bear with me if there are technical delays. I'm having a little bit of a lag. Can everyone see my presentation there? Thumbs up? Yes. Okay, I see a nod. Super. So yeah, I had the great good fortune to go to NASCAD from 2001 to 2004. I went there having studied at Dawson College in Montreal before. I'm from Montreal. And I had hoped to do kind of interdisciplinary studies. I had a lot of like doing large scale installations, covering spaces, filling spaces with a lot of color. But I ended up in film studies. And then after film studies, I ended up sort of editing scripts, helping people. I was much more in the written word. I had done some language tutoring because of being bilingual. So I ended up studying translation, moving out of not really enjoying being on set once I was back in Montreal. And through translation, I moved to Newfoundland and ended up being a medical interpreter, which we'll see on the next slide of experience. But that brought me to being in a hospital setting, really loving that job and realizing, oh, I'd like to actually go back and study something where I can be in a hospital setting, but not be a doctor, which is what my mom was. Seemed like too much responsibility. Loved being a medical interpreter. So I thought, okay, but there's something here to do with this long-standing passion for language. Went back, studied SLP, speech language pathology, again in Montreal at McGill University. And then after years of practicing that in Newfoundland, I decided to return again and study at McGill. So intermittently between all the studies, there was some work experience. And so here I am with my beeper being an on-call language interpreter, which I think is one of my favorite jobs I've had to date. Rushing to the hospital, even if you have a lasagna in the oven, you have to be there in 20 minutes and you see all aspects of the full cycle of life from the beginning to the end, and really acting as kind of more of a patient advocate, I would say, because you stay with the patient for their whole trajectory. So I was doing a whole bunch of things while I was in Newfoundland doing that, going back to school, getting my prerequisites to study speech language pathology as a little bit of a older than the average student starting that. And at the same time, I was always sort of drawing whenever I was doing my internships to become an SLP. I was making the materials. I was asking if I could volunteer to make the materials for older patients and that kind of thing. So it's always been in there. That's a picture of my hands when I would let kids put a sticker where we'd have a back and forth about which color and naming things. Um, and then, yeah, so speech language pathology was something that I did, I'm still doing, but I did full time in schools all around Newfoundland for close to 5 years, and moved to Toronto and did a project that we'll see in the slideshow here. And I'm now currently working in a job I also love. It's an inter-university center called the Center for Research on Brain, Language, and Music. So it's sort of a cognitive neuroscience approach among different university centers, just creating opportunities for collaboration between scientists in various disciplines at different university institutions, but then also inviting people and bringing our knowledge to the public, their work to the public. So over the years, some things I've worked on that kept my art practice a little bit bubbling along were being asked from being from the neighborhood I'm from in Montreal. A lot of my friends ended up being musicians. So doing little projects for them, whether it was music videos or posters, promotions, those kind of things. But I think my favorite was maybe doing a little animated music video. And then I started, when I went back to school after realizing I was making these materials, increasingly feeling like disappointed by the materials available for kids with speech language differences. So I was making a lot of bespoke materials. So that's when I decided to go back and really study some of the literature behind multilingual environments, multilingual learners, and multilingual classrooms. So here I started not just drawing the things, but producing the materials for sort of pilot studies. And then I was doing much more of the like poster presentations and taking a bit more of a scientific approach to what I was creating. So trying to look at what actually is the relationship between, say, an emergent bilingual home in Montreal, where the parents might not be very strong in French, might be English or another language, as we say here, allophone, and what that does to the homeschool relationship, what it means for the children, what it means for the families. So sort of substantiating via the research what I was going to do artistically and why. And in Toronto, I had the great good fortune to partner with my pal Don and my pal Tennessee there, the dog. And we put together an animal assisted empathy education program and moved into also consent-based education. And that was just about to take off and be my sort of next big thing I wanted to do. But Ontario took a pretty interesting approach to shutting down schools and keeping them nice and shut. So just as the momentum was building, that project got interrupted. And again, like back into trying to find ways of doing things across disciplines. While I was studying, I was in an aesthetics course, and I had a kind of surprising medical discovery. So I was trying to write something about negative aesthetics, but do an illustrated essay, which I find in academia not super appreciated, the idea of an illustrated essay, but I managed to get it through on this one. So that was, again, just moving in the direction of finding a way to do interdisciplinary work, which I find is often sort of nominal, like interdisciplinary studies within NASCAD is a thing, and you can do painting and drawing, but the idea of trying to get science and art to come together can sometimes be a little challenging. I've been working on some wordless picture books. So this is one of the ones that was a collaboration, but also had to do with a lot of the research I was doing in multilingual classrooms still. So trying to do a wordless picture book about language. So it was a little philosophical, again, some pushback, but overall it went well. And then back to my musicians friends, collaborating with someone who was doing his master's at York, like you, Molly, but for him, it was in music composition. And so we were collaborating to do something here that was, again, a wordless picture book, but that would have a score that would go with it and would reflect the sort of journeys of these various types of communicators. And currently, I'm very fortunate to be collaborating with this group who we can't really see, but so small, led mostly by Nyla Coleman, who does really interesting work in various disciplines. She's also collaborating with circus artists. And so we put together a project to try to find, we're always trying to find different ways to bring together the arts and the sciences to communicate different embodied experiences. And in this case, embodied experience of living with Parkinson's disease for the sort of healthcare benefit and communication benefit of the both formal and informal caretakers who work with those individuals. And yeah, I'm looking forward to questions. I hope that wasn't too rambly or too long. Thank you.
And that was wonderful. What a great overview of your practice and career. Okay, I have a quick question. What is a medical interpreter?
So I had previously been a translator, which is all on paper, but when we talk about interpreters, we're usually talking about spoken language or communication that is, verbal and live. And when I went into that, because I had this translation background on paper, I was very much like, okay, you say exactly what the person said and you ask for, because I also was a court interpreter, and that's, you really say what the person said. A legal interpreter, but both of those are live interpretations. So someone says something and you translate it to the other language. But in Newfoundland, what I was doing was being called to the hospital. So whether someone was medevaced in, because there's Saint-Pierre-et-Miquelon, we have a Canada-France border, the little known Canada-France border. So people would be medevaced to the hospitals of Newfoundland, and I would rush over there when my beeper went off and do a birth or a death or anything in between, lots of scans and things like that, regular procedures, and both acute care and otherwise. And I loved that job. It was never the same thing 2 days in a row. And it was a real opportunity to smooth over communication. But like I said, I realized it was much more like a patient advocate, because you're there for whoever comes into the waiting room, whoever comes into to any examination, and you represent both the patient and their family members in all communication. So really love that.
Oh, wonderful. I mean, one of the things I love about these conversations is I learn about so many different lines of work that people go into after their time at NASCAD. So that's wonderful. Thank you, Amelia. Charmaine, I'd love to chat with you a little bit and hear a little introduction into your practice, where you're based, what you're up to these days. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
This is kind of a great introduction, like a really bumpy, like step into this talk, like I'm the queen of imperfection. So this, I think, is the best way to introduce myself.
Okay, I love
Mm. Well, that's just a picture of me and my mom and my two older sisters, Melinda and Melissa. They're identical twins, totally like The Shining. And so I was raised in a very strict Jehovah's Witness upbringing. I had an amazing mom, and I'd say getting into art school really saved me. And so I guess I don't even, yeah, I have, yeah, how to begin. So then the next slide would be the fish paintings. That would be, I guess, representing a turning point. I had a horrible semester. I was studying with Jerry Ferguson, and it was just miserable. And then I painted between semesters, and I had I'd buy a codfish a day for $1.49 at the time. And I would put it in a basin of water, and I would just paint it, and for 8 or 12 hours, and go home, get another fish the next day, paint it. And then Jerry gave me a thumbs up. And it's always nice for anybody who knows Gerald Ferguson to get a thumbs up from him. He's kind of crusty. It felt really good. And then I put them in a show. At that time, you weren't allowed to sell your work, sign your work. You weren't an artist, you were a student. But I did give them all to Enika Graham at Studio 21, and she sold them all. And I thought, and I did some other fish paintings, but fish represented a whole lot for me, and it was just a turning point. I guess that's what that represents for me. Before, I have to do a shout out for my high school art teacher, though, Mrs. Dorothy Jackson. She used to be faculty at NASCAD, but when there was a shift in the 60s or 70s, she wasn't there anymore. But I ended up getting a very, when it came to skills, good drawing and painting skills, knowledge, life changer. So I think I started NASCAD in grade 10 in high school, really, actually. And so the next slide would be after the cod. I don't know, I'm all over the place here. There's so much to talk about. I was looking at the questions that you shared with us, Molly, and I was trying to answer those. It's just very exciting. Oh, that's my studio setup right there. I have little watercolors, really good quality though. I'll spend money on paint, and I've taken classes at Kramer Pigments in New York City to make my own watercolors. And then, but my practice is little tins of boxes. I've been doing this since forever. Oh, everything's happening here. I feel like I should be talking quicker. How exciting. So I just fill up boxes with little drawings, scraps of paper, and it's interesting to just make art with what's around you, not making it some precious thing that's unattainable, this beautiful studio, or it came out of living in New York City, where I was just on the hustle all the time. And before I went to New York City, I had, I think, 2 studios where I could oil paint in every day. But New York, there was no time for 8 hours a day focused painting. It was just on the subway painting for 15 minutes, and then my stop would happen, and I'd quickly gather up my stuff and hustle, and just, and performance art became more my thing at that time. So, but portraiture would be the one thing that, if I don't mention my love of people, then that would be me not talking about what drives me. Like, if there are no people, I'm not motivated to do anything. Like that beautiful Fogo Island residency is beautiful, but without people with me, to be just in complete solitude. I like pockets of solitude, but not complete. So I do hundreds, maybe thousands of portraits. And what you're looking at here are some little portraits I was working on for the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. In 2012, I'd say that's when my life shifted. And I got like a massive Canada Council grant to do a crazy performance like work. I was invited to go to the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum for the first time, where I just bawled my eyes out. They treated me so well. My studio was gorgeous. They gave me so much money instead of like sneaking around trying to be listened to and to, I was told when I got there by Anne Hawley, the director at the time, she was like, "You're here to daydream." And I was like, oh my God, that is never something I've been given permission, not even myself, to give myself permission to daydream. It's something I always steal, but it's so necessary. And also, I just want to point out my crabby earrings. Everybody look in.
Ooh,
Look,
gorgeous.
beady little black eyes.
Are they leather? What are they made of?
They're sort of like textile, like kind of woven with little fluorescent dangly toes. Okay, distracted. What else? Then did I go through all the slides? I think or maybe I talked enough. What do you think?
I
Let's
think
go
that's
to
great.
Molly asking questions. Maybe that would be good.
I think that's great. And then if Trina wants to pull up more images at any point, like I'm all for it. But let's fine tune some of those things you both brought up. I think it's so interesting. I love what you were saying about your love of working with people. And I think that art making can often be understood to be fairly solitary. And sometimes there's a kind of like uh belief that the studio practice is very solitary for sure. But what I like about both of your practices is that they're very people facing. Um, they're enmeshed in networks of care. So I want to ask a question along those lines and ask you about where does care factor into your art practice, and also where you think an artistic training has benefited you in working in healthcare and medicine. Maybe Amelia, we can start with you. What do you think about the relationship between care, healthcare, and artistic practices?
Yeah. I don't know that I would still have much of an artistic practice if it weren't for wanting to care for people, because I really do just think that, it's fundamentally a form of communication. You can't communicate with nobody. So, or I can't, I don't think, but yeah, I think it's sort of like the idea of, oh, what are I didn't really think that I was sort of responding artistically necessarily as an SLP, but I knew that I was appalled by what existed just aesthetically. I was like, I can't use those materials, but then that also allows you to be very responsive. Like, right now beside me, all around me, my desk looks quite similar. It's full of all the things. And the things right now are, well, last week, one of the kids I'm working with got to be able to say a certain shape of word. And so, well, I'll just make him a whole new set of that shape of word, but it'll be exactly things he's motivated to. He likes to say moon. So moon rhymes with loon. So he gets a moon and a loon. But those kind of things, like I think to me, I really don't know if I hadn't sort of followed the language path into a caring profession, would I still be drawing or painting or anything quite as much, I think, than the multilingual classroom and what those learners needed. And even when it came to making an illustrated story for the empathy education thing with dogs, it's like, well, that the kids have to be able to see that it's this dog and that we're talking about these exact things. And I think one definitely motivates the other, but really finding that fundamentally it's a form of communication, and communication is a form of care. And I don't know how to separate them.
No, that's wonderful. Thanks, Amelia. Charmaine, same question to you. What do you think about the connection between healthcare and care and artistic practice? How do they influence one another for you?
Humanity. I'd
Mm,
say that it's everything. And I think here in this hospital, it's something, it's really exciting to see how the humanities are becoming more and more important. It's not just about treating bodies, it's what's inside too. And so it's been pretty cool. Like I didn't say how I even got to be here was I had done all these portraits at the Gardner Museum, and Steve Dewhurst, he's here at the university. He's now like the vice dean of research. I think he does a few things. We got talking, and it ended up the type of portraiture that I do. It's not just what you look like. It's like what you say and who you are, and like your words. And so my portraits include things that my sitter will say that it's unique. It's like, oh, I haven't heard that before. I need to make a note of that so I can go and Google it later, or check out that song, or this combination of, so it was kind of like a little theory or something. Like we pulled it together that I would come here to destigmatize or help destigmatize mental illness and HIV. That's how it started. And just by sitting and doing what it is that I was doing at the Gardner Museum, and they still have like 200 portraits up at the Gardner, which is really cool, but it's sort of applying that for some sort of good, actually, like an applied purpose. And I can say I've seen how it's effective, and then it's evolved with installations in the hospital setting too. So but just sitting with somebody, phones off, focusing for 1 hour with an individual, and we do portraits of people that are important. And that's one of the things that's really important to me, is maybe how we embrace stigma. Like, I'm not good enough because maybe I live with some sort of mental health diagnosis, or but you're not just that. And then what I find is, when we start to look at what we have in common, I'll talk forever about it, but I basically, it's just, when we look at individuals instead of groups of people, and we can see the humanity and see how much we've got in common, it's ever critical to remember this right now with what's going on in the States and the outcome of the election. Like, I've been very challenged this past couple of weeks with how do I continue with my work. And I've been crying all the time. Humanity, like, even now, it still exists.
I want to ask a little bit more about your project. You're creating these series of portraits, and you're in conversation with people who are living with HIV and AIDS, and living with in like recovery of addiction. And I was wondering how you find the collaboration and relationships with these sitters. Are they more open to you as an artist in a healthcare setting, or like what is the dynamic there of with you as an artist in a medical environment for them?
Molly, that is like the most important question. Like, I'm so glad you asked it, because it's an obvious question, and yet it just eclipsed. But it is no small thing to walk into a hospital. I'm like an artist. Usually you should stay away from us. We are pushing buttons, challenging conventions. We shouldn't always be trusted, because, so before I got here, I came and I was back-to-back meetings for a couple of days with all the different players and people in the hospital. I was working with psychiatry, neuroscience, and then also HIPAA. That's a big thing, like confidentiality. And my portraits have patients' words in my, you know, it is not a small thing, but early on, I am not, it was clear, I'm not doing research. This isn't science. This isn't, I'm not, you know, with NIH. There's no, which gives me, it's so wonderful to have the artistic license and to be trusted. And, but that trust, I guess, has been earned because I've done this so much quickly. I think I'm pretty good at making quick decisions. You know, some things don't need to go in the portrait. And I make a distinction. There's the portrait sitting where it's just between me and the sitter and it's private. And I usually have a helicopter person who keeps it private, but I usually do sittings in public spaces for different reasons. Usually I have like certain rules and stuff. And then we also do have like I don't know, a 6-page consent, but the consent is just to let you know what you're getting into and explain, because this is a different thing that hasn't been done elsewhere. And it is in a hospital. And so, and then little things happen along the way, but it is not a small thing for somebody to open up and and have their portrait done like this. And there have been some challenges along the way, where, you know, we have to communicate, like what Amelia was saying. It's so important. And I didn't know anybody when I came to Rochester. Now I know so many people really well, and I love them. Like some people who have voted for Trump, undoubtedly, I love them, and that to me feels successful. Yeah, but I don't know if I answered that well enough, but a lot of people, oh, also people like Kathy Bunce or Caroline Nestro, or when it came to going down to the southern tier, the opiate use disorder, the mayor, Les Stapleton, this brilliant mayor who took me on a ride on his Harley. And like, you can't just walk in and just say, you know, I'm just going to do your portrait and everything's going to be okay. Some people that's not good for. And so a lot of decisions get, and I work with a bunch of brilliant people to make it happen. Like without them, I couldn't be here. And I have to be respectful. Like I have to remember, first and foremost, I'm in service to this hospital and to the research that's happening and the patients and their care. I am second to that. And that's a bit different from a visual artist in a gallery or some other artist in residence. I think Ariane Paulette Brannon, who's here, she understands this too, because I'm sure a lot. Anyway, thanks. That's a long answer.
No, that's great. It's wonderful to hear about, yeah, like what goes into artists navigating these spaces and how they can enrich them, but also like, yeah, the ethics of navigating healthcare as an artist is a very complex issue, I imagine. So thank you for shedding. Yeah. Amelia, this brings to mind what you were saying about navigating like academia and kind of like science leaning academia as a visual artist, and the pushback you had around your visual essay contribution. But then I know you were also talking about the use of picture books in your speech language pathology work. And yeah, how do you find navigating these roles as artist and healthcare worker together? And when are they collaborative and when are they maybe in conflict?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So Nyla Coleman, who I'm collaborating with on the embodied experiences of Parkinson's thing, which is a big part of what she does. She does very beautiful work. But she came from, you know, she was doing like fully straight ahead, very narrow path of career choice, testing things on mice, learning about Parkinson's from that type of like wet lab type of work, and gradually moved more and more towards the arts. So I think really interdisciplinary collaboration as with an arts background and trying to bring that into the science world versus you come with this very serious science background that can be respected in the sciences, and you sort of try to reach out and collaborate with artists. There are challenges to doing it in both directions, but I would say that my experience of speech language pathology and cognitive neuroscience broadly as areas, as disciplines, they're sort of like, for example, I have one very nice friend within the university setting who every time we're doing whatever it is, and I might do something that I would never notice that I had just done, and he will say, she's an artist. Like there's this sort of like understanding of me, or it's part of my personality, or and it's an explanation for why I do things differently, or and that's fine because that is the case. But yeah, I think maybe there are differences to approaching art science interdisciplinary collaboration from one side or from the other side. And it is true that I think Nyla gets some of the things that she manages to do, and passing, ethics review and getting permission to work with certain patient populations and having the respect of the doctors that she's collaborating with sometimes does come from them knowing her trajectory and saying, okay, like, yes, she's trying to work with circus artists now, but she comes from this thing that we see as a discipline we understand, and we know how to sort of quantify it, and we know that she'll do things in a certain way. And yeah, so I think there are advantages to both, disadvantages to both. There is one shining example in Montreal, a program at Concordia called the Convergence Initiative. I'll try to find the link here and put it in for anyone who's curious, but they are really doing, every year they have an exhibit, and they have students from the IPN, so the integrated program in neuroscience, and they pair them with art students at Concordia, and they do a full pretty intensive 6-credit course that I think is one example that I think is a really good example of right from the get-go, those things it's to create a level playing field for the contributions from both sort of sides of that. And now I rambled.
No, not at all. I wanted to also ask you a little bit more about the use of children's picture books in your work. You, in our conversation before the talk, you were mentioning Sydney Smith's book. You also showed some of your own work in the presentation you gave. So could you tell us a little bit about what that kind of visual learning does in the artistic work of children's picture books in working with children and speech language pathology?
Yeah, so gosh, Sydney Smith, that's how I got recruited for this talk, by the way. So I'm glad that I went to that, but mostly glad just because he's so excellent, and he's a hero of mine. And I was able to use his beautiful book, I Talk Like a River, so much. And it's, yeah, very powerful what the images can do, and how thoughtful he is about what is the contribution of the words, what is the contribution of the images, what do we allow a person to experience through the combination of both or either. I use in my practice a lot of wordless picture books, and part of why I make my own materials is a lot of illustrated materials for children have words, and for kids who are starting to be sensitive to the fact that they're different in some kind of way as it relates to words, I think the words can be really off-putting and can really create resistance. So I'd like to make things that have no words, and part of why I use wordless picture books in my SLP practice is that sort of the same rationale, and everybody can contribute what they can contribute. Doesn't necessarily have to be verbal. Not everybody is going to contribute using the verbal modality, but for the kids who can contribute using a verbal modality, it might not always be the same as everybody else. And then similarly, when I started doing the research on multilingual classrooms, it was to try to create supports that can be used at home, can be used at school. The kids then are the knowledgeable ones, right? They can be in school and have the knowledge they have from home of their home language. They can be at home and be saying, well, this is what we talked about in school. So trying to put I think it's like, it's very empowering. It's very empowering to offer images. And sometimes, and for me, some of the ones I created are really quite abstract images. So it's not even to say, yes, you got that right. That is a dog stealing the toothbrush from the man. What do you see? You're the expert on this page, and everybody gets a turn. And yeah, thank you for asking. It's my favorite subject. I'll be quiet.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah, and so interesting to think about in a profession that is so formed around words and how we form words, it's very interesting to consider how the visual is a part of that, and how that can be kind of a bridge in learning for people. So thanks for sharing, Amelia. In the similar vein, Charmaine, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the portraits you do and how you feel that, how do I want to say this? How that kind of image composition, how making those images does work of healing, does work of engaging with, stigma. What do you think that practice and those images help to do?
Well, I think that, well, there's something that we didn't get to see on that like little thing that I put together. And it's maybe the installations and it's the application. It's like there's the practice of the actual sitting. That's very rewarding for me. And I think the sitter gets something out of it too. But then I do installations in the hospital setting, and I'm careful to use materials. Like, I'm not into putting original artwork up in a hospital with gurneys and a lot of activity going on. It's so I'll use, like, there's this material Moxie, it's scratch resistant, UV protected. It's easy to clean. I think keeping things clean in a hospital is very important. No papier-mâché sculptures. I think those are nasty for a hospital environment. And so and also one of the things that I'm thinking of, there's where to go with this. Okay. 3 documentaries have been made around the work that I do, and 2, I think, have won Emmys, which is cool. Another one won an award up in Halifax. But so that process of people seeing themselves in a documentary, having their like, there are so many. Then we've done postcards. So the portraits get printed and they can be shared and sent around, and as well as, so I think that all of that being visible, like, first of all, being willing to be identified with a stigmatized, marginalized group, that's one thing. And not asking, because the people that I've done portraits of in these communities, it's not necessarily that they have a diagnosis of some sort. They might have a friend or a family, or they might be a professional who's in service to, like, helping their lives better. So it's just the community kind of thing. Now I'm in neuroscience, so it's not so much stigma for the work that I'm doing in neuroscience. It's one of the things that I'm interested in is this university only used to admit white men could go here, and that's super not the case anymore. Like, we have a very diverse faculty and student population, but yet we still have a lot of white men on the walls. And so Nate is one of the first Black men on the walls. And I had this painting in my studio, and somebody was like, what sports team does he play for? Because, like I said, you do portraits of important people, and typically if you're Black, you're an athlete or you're a musician. And so it was really exciting for me to say, hey, that's like one of our brilliant neuroscientists, because you don't generally think of neuroscientists as. So then what was great for me was having the painting in, it's a lobby area where people just hang out and sit, and there's a QR code, and I was just, how they put live, love, laugh on the walls? Like, I was like, you just have to go with the flow and be free. And that's something he said, but it's very accessible. It's not lofty. And then you wonder what sports team he plays for. So you have to click on the QR code, and then it takes you to like a gallery where you see more about who Nate is and what his research is about. But also language is really important to me. When I do writing, I'm working with scientists to make sure that the language isn't stupid, because I'm not a scientist. So, but I also don't want it to be so dense that it's not accessible, because it's not a high art gallery space. It's not necessarily like a science lab where it's just neuroscientists that you're talking with. So the portraits add as a like work is like maybe a bridge to many areas, if that makes any sense. And also women too, you know, this woman, Dr. Anya Majuska, she can build a 2-photon microscope. Apparently that's like, I mean, it sounds, in addition to doing like amazing research, that is just the questions that she has and who she's just, so it's a nice way, like if she can make me understand what she's doing, then anybody can understand what she's doing. So it might help young girls or young Black American boys kind of go, I can do that. You know, I know when I was in art school, it was really good to see women who painted well, like Suzanne Valadon, or, you know, Alice Neal. You know, it was very affirming, like I could do that, because these, yeah, that's what that's part of. I don't know if this is answering. I mean, this is another thing that I do, is like, this university is largely responsible for the invention of surfactant. Before surfactant was invented, thousands of babies would just die, and they just couldn't breathe. Like, so many things that, you know, you take for granted, like when you're a tiny little baby in the NICU, it's not just easy like that for every little baby. And it's just really nice to celebrate, you know, this. I mean, Lori Steiner, she is just such a nice doctor and researcher who is focused on the 7,000 rare genetic diseases, which is like, I guess, the largest contributing factor to death in the NICU.
I love seeing some of these works installed, because it's refreshing to see. I think when I think of images in medical context, I often think of them as very like sterile or like didactic, like they're there to be informative, but not necessarily beautiful. And even, although they can be, of course, but even to see Nate like posed in a kind of dancey way is really refreshing. I think we don't often see healthcare practitioners represented that way, and I think it's a very it's an interesting and engaging way to think about how that can be a strategy to like connect patients with doctors and make them feel more comfortable in a space that is often maybe like hard to navigate, like medical settings, right?
Totally, trust as well. Like, if
Yeah.
you see them as a human, not as just a white coat. Like, I think it's good we have these uniforms, like the white coat, because you want to identify them, but it also can be negative, because then you can just easily put them into one basket, write them all off, don't trust them because you had one experience with some other white coat, and it's so demanding. It's so like, the more we can find a little wiggle room for each other, especially now, like, I think the better off we will be. More love.
Oh, thank you guys. Well, listen, I have more questions to ask of both of you, but I also want to give everyone a chance in the audience to ask some questions. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys. If we don't get anything, I will ask my questions. But if you would like to ask Amelia and Charmaine any questions, please turn on your microphone or raise your hand or put it in the chat and I'll read it out loud. And yeah, go ahead.
Hello, Marley. Great job as always. Thank you so much for your insightful presentation, Amelia and Charmaine. Amelia, the first question I have for you, you have a lot of degrees, right? But there was one thing that stood out. The Canadians apparently the most educated people in the world, several rankings. Number one, Canada. And so I find it fascinating. You said your mother is a doctor and you chose not to do medicine. I want to ask the question, why? The reason I'm asking you is that I know doctors. I live with one. Most children of doctors do not want to be doctors. And if at all they do it, it's because they're looking at the opportunity cost of a well paid career. But many of the children of doctors totally rebel against medicine. So the question to you is, why not medicine?
Great question. And I thought I had heard, but maybe it was just like old folk. I thought I had heard that lawyers and doctors were the two most predictive of child career choice. They were the most sort of sustaining. No, okay, I'm wrong about
Not
that.
anymore. The
Okay.
new breed of
Okay.
children want a, a life that has a work-life balance. So I'm just
Okay.
curious as to your why.
I honestly, was saying this in the lead up in one of the preparatory conversations, that I remember having a conversation where someone was asking me why I was going to art school. And I was saying, well, I really don't think I could do anything else. And he said, oh, you're so lucky. That means you really know what you have to do. Whereas I thought it was a total negative. I thought, well, I'm kind of stuck. This is the only thing I think I remember drawing before I could speak. Like I always drew, and neither of my parents really did. And it just always seemed like it seemed inevitable to me. And also, not a small factor, but I was quite bad at math in high school. I think I got very discouraged by my potential. And then I kind of did it in reverse. I did go, I say sometimes I'm like educated to within an inch of my life. I did go to school a lot. Turns out I like school also. And so part of the studies, like after SLP, I mean, SLP is sort of my top ranking degree, and I went back again, and I might go back again. Sometimes I tell my friends, if I ever say the letter P, just get out a frying pan and whack me over the head. I don't want to do it anymore. But I think I like school. I loved being an art student. I never wanted to call myself an artist, but I loved calling myself an art student. The only sadness I had about NASCAD was like I would go back 10 times. I just wanted to do all the programs. So I think I was very motivated. I never saw actually the full 3 years I was there. I never saw Point Pleasant Park. I spent every night overnight in the studios. I loved being in the studios overnight when it was quiet and you could just make art. Yeah, I was sort of insatiable, certainly at
You
that
can
time. So
come back.
thank you.
You can
That was
come
my
back.
why.
You can come back. What you do is incredible work, because I've had to also engage the services of a speech therapist, and one who has an art background. Is it allows for so much. The children are calmer. One, two, you're able to bring in the art as well. If you're drawing with a child or doing that with a child, it takes them to a place of a zone whereby they flow. Everyone is calmer. So thank you for the work you do. Charmaine, I enjoyed listening to you. You reminded me of so many people at once. Um, the question I have for you is, you kept saying you said something about you were given so much money for 2 years for the amount of work you have done and the value you have given. Please don't say they gave you so much money. It's well worth what you did. It's incredible work. It's really relevant work. If it's I've been in hospital settings whereby you mentioned white coat, but you didn't continue. White coat syndrome is the thing whereby when healthcare workers come across patients, a lot of patients, their anxiety levels go up. It's a studied phenomenon. And so the fact that you're able to put um, a spin somewhat and humanize the healthcare workers, it goes a long way. It lowers the level of anxiety. When you're creating, even if it's just with patients, there's something called a state of flow. And in that state of flow, the work you do and also the work Amelia does, people are able to get into a zone. And for however long, those 30 minutes, 45 minutes, They don't remember anything about, I'm a depressed, anxious person. No, they're just doing the work. So 80,000 for 2 years is great, but in America, for artists who have been recognized for the work they do, there's something called the MacArthur Grant, and they would give you $575,000 to be disbursed over 5 years to do whatever you want with your practice. Thank you, both of you.
That's very sweet. I mean, I have to put it into context, because not long before I got that grant from the Canada Council, so it's a jury of peers, like other visual artists.
Yes.
It wasn't long before that I couldn't pay my rent, and I would just be drawing, and my landlady would be calling 3 months behind rent. So to all of a sudden, within a couple of months, go to work at this gorgeous museum in Boston, like live in this museum. It's the museum that the largest art heist in the world, in history, took place. 13 major artworks, 2 Rembrandts, a Vermeer, a Degas, like I can't remember them all.
There's a documentary on that.
Several documentaries. So
Yes.
to go and live there, and just to hear, to come from deprivation and just not knowing and feeling like being an artist, I couldn't get out of it. Like it was an affliction, not something I couldn't, I don't know. So it was very overwhelming in 2012 to have just a total change of landscape for me in my life. And since then, it's been amazing. And it just, in spite of myself and my ability to self-sabotage a situation through like too much, it's still, I'm very grateful that some things that you had said, it reminded me, because some of the people that I work with are very this was one of, so we do have these, we made these postcards because there was a show here at the the Memorial Art Gallery around HIV posters. So we have these portraits that we turned into postcards to give out, but these people that work in education and in the humanities, the chair of the humanities department here, Stephanie Brown Clark, she's retired now, but we work together, and I just do what I'm doing that feels right. And then these guys who study that stuff, they wrote, and we came up with this brochure, which kind of makes it teachable, where a medical student can start to learn how to see the human, not just treating or fixing or curing the problem. And that's not natural for everybody. Somehow that's something that is just, that's like my superpower. And so I have no problem with taking the money now, but at that time I didn't have any. So it was like, there were talks I went to, and I had the subway fare to get there, but I don't know how I got home. Just, it's kind of incredible where, what's her name? The performance artist. I went to hear her talk, and, oh, what's her name? I love her. Everybody loves to hate her, but she's fantastic. And
The Russian lady?
What's that?
Is it the Russian lady?
She's Eastern European. And
Yes.
what, who is it? Come on. Who's
Mariana Abramovich?
Yes. And I was like bawling my eyes out. I heard her talking in this panel discussion, and she was talking about how they went to do this performance in Italy, and they were told that they were they would get $200 and they needed that money to go on to the next performance date, but they're there naked on stage and they don't have the money. And Ulai went into the office and she started telling, and I was crying and I didn't stop crying. And then so then I saw her in the lobby of NYU and I was like, and she gave me this hug and she's just like, you just got to keep doing it. Don't worry. And that's so true. You just keep doing your thing and just keep doing it no matter what it is, like whatever your thing is. And everybody has their own, and Gordon Lauren, he told me that like a few people along the way, and then there are these people that we encounter are champions, you know, and they, I think that they give us like little boosts too. And it's just, yeah, anyway, it's just so nice that you guys all like are giving us the time of day. I love it.
But I'm hopeful that going forward, that artists will be able to make a living from what they do, because it's such essential work. It's not a profit center, but if you put away the benefits of art, it will be a horrid world.
Oh.
Thank you.
Thank
Sorry.
Thank you for bringing such a positive energy to what I assume you bring to the world, because that was like very generous and it really does matter. And I was going to say the similar story to meeting someone at Mattering. I was doing these portraits for a while of Tom Brady, which is a long story that I will not get into. A side project. Not there, he doesn't need portraits made of him, but most of it was a joke. Anyway, at one point there was one of him and Luis Guzman, and I met Luis Guzman for weird circumstances, and he was so nice. He like he's a character actor. I don't know if you know him, but of the people who have told me that they liked my work and who were in the arts world and it mattered in some other way, I would always just go, no, that doesn't matter. That person's opinion doesn't matter. But there was something about the fact that there was no reason for him to say that he liked this strange portrait I had made. And he was so kind, and he said almost like word for word. That's why it reminded me of it, Charmaine. He said, he's like, I don't know stuff. I don't know about things. I don't know about art, but this is, I know it when I see it. So you should just keep doing that. Don't let anybody tell you to stop doing it. Just keep doing it. And whenever I think about not doing something, I'm always like, well, Luis Guzman thought it was, he was very nice about it. So you never know. So thank you for bringing such positive energy to this talk, because it did make me feel very valued, and that does matter. So bringing that kind of, especially as you say, Charmaine, now more than ever, I think it matters every day, the types of ways that we approach people. And I can see that in your work, Charmaine, what you're bringing people. I imagine people sitting, and if I may have a question, I saw that there was a question about this in the chat, so I'll allow it to myself, because I also had this question given the collaborative portrait work we did and trying to set that up both ethically, but also just in a way that was human, and would part of it really was about having healthcare workers see the person beyond the disease, right? And healthcare workers and informal caregivers. What is it that you want to communicate? How can we communicate it? How can we create this moment? But we learned through our interviews and through the process of trying various things out that, everybody's an individual. People have really different feelings about either producing a portrait or being a sitter. We were trying to have people draw each other at the same time. We had different setups. And so someone asked about what the trajectory is of a given sitter within one sitting, and also how you have found ways to approach it so that sitting for a portrait is a positive experience that they draw a good feeling from, if it's therapeutic both within the moment and also as an artistic practice for you.
I think it's kind of one of the cool things that you just made me think of is I kind of like how people look at me painting and they go, I could do this. I got some paints. I love that. People go around authoring, the power of authoring your own image. And they've shown me, and it's just, it's really, everybody has like a little set of pencils or colors or something, just, it's not a big deal, you don't. So that's one cool thing. And one of the reasons why I like to do it in a public setting. is it just demystifies the art making practice. It's not like in the movies always, you know. And I do have little strategies for taking the edge off of it. But like I said, I have people that help match make me kind of thing. And I have a sitting, like I don't do more than 3 portrait sittings at a time. And I like them to happen back to back. And I also, since I obviously lose track of time quite easily, I have to have somebody keeping time, because I could have that sitter sit there days, months, you know, there no food, there no sleep, and I'll lose track of, you know, but just to make it safe for them and for me, you know, because other people might want to stay forever too. Boundaries are super important when working with people you don't know, and it's what makes it possible for instant intimacy and a love fest to happen. Like, if there is no structure, it's just a blob and it's not safe. Like, you come at this time, we do the consent, it's 10 to 15 minutes, the portrait starts at this time, it does not go past this time, we get warnings to wrap things up in the process, photographs are taken of the sitting, there will be public presentation of your work, you have no control over it, you won't own the original. Once it's done, somebody else might buy it, it might be on TV, it will never be destroyed, you don't get to say how it goes. Like, all of these things need to be said before the sitting happens. Then that helps. Like, then there's afterwards. If after it happened you have a question, I'm reachable. This is how you get in touch with me. There are people as well that you can talk with if you don't want to talk to me. It's not a hard and fast things. We have guidelines, but then there's air. They breathe, you know, like, it shouldn't be too rigid and strict, because that's what helps us do something we've never done before, by having like all kinds of brilliant minds coming together. Nothing good ever happened by one person all alone. It always takes, the more people involved, the better, I think. So that, I don't know if that, like, you probably relate, it's along the same lines for, yeah.
Well, speaking of brilliant minds, it's been wonderful to have both of you here in conversation. Thank you so much for sharing so much about your practice, and speaking to us about art and healing. So yeah, big thanks to Charmaine and Amelia. Please check out more of their work. I think there's some links in the chat for anyone who's still here. And yes, thanks again, and please join us next month for our next artwork. Thank you, guys.